welcome back to Fast Casual. I'm your host, Miranda Copjec. Today I'm joined by Kelly Gray, VP and co-owner of Hothead Burritos, a fast casual brand that's making waves with its bold flavors and rapid expansion. Kelly has played a key role in driving the brand's growth, leading Hothead Burritos to open 8 new locations across 4 states in 2025 alone. Kelly is passionate about empowering women in the hospitality space, fostering community impact, and embracing innovation in restaurant operations. In honor of Women's History Month, we'll be diving into her journey, how she transitioned from commercial real estate to restaurant leadership, her approach to scaling a brand while maintaining quality, and the lessons she's learned along the way. Kelly, it's great to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me, Miranda, especially in Women's Month. So empowering women all over. So I'm super honored to be here now and really glad that you're doing this focus.
Yeah, no, I like to say, some of my most favorite conversations are learning from other like women in the hospitality space. So obviously Women's History Month, no better way, but I think I love to have these conversations all the time, and just really glad that you're able to join me for such an incredible episode to honor such an incredible month. But I'm excited to, kind of give the listeners some insight into, your background, your experience, and kind of, give them a little intro into, your background in Hothead Burritos.
Yeah, great. Well, I again appreciate being here. My journey, I didn't start out in the restaurant business at all. I actually started several careers, but more recently commercial real estate. I've been involved with that for over 20 years now. And my focus quickly became when I got into real estate was retail and restaurant work because I just always found it super interesting. It was always quick moving, things were happening, all the newest brands coming out, and it was just a very exciting piece of it. And then, eventually transitioned into ownership in Hothead back in 2017. But prior to that, also co-founded a brand called Rapid Fired Pizza in 2015, which we then sold to an investment group in 2021. So we could really put our focus on Hothead and really growing that brand.
Amazing. So I would love to hear a little bit more about that journey, especially from commercial real estate to the hospitality space as a whole. As I'm learning more and more about the hospitality space, and obviously working in the hospitality space, there's such intersection between real estate and growing brands. Love to kind of hear like your journey throughout that transition.
Yeah, so super interesting. I had been in commercial real estate for several years, and actually, the very first Hothead was started in a center that I represented. And my partner now, Ray Wiley, was a subway operator at the time, and he had a subway in the center that a client of mine bought to redevelop. And he came to me and said, "Hey, the subway guy's going to start this new concept called Hothead Burritos, and we're going to give him a 1-year lease, and if it works, we'll renew him." And funny thing is, my comment to my client was, people who only want to do 1-year lease aren't serious. Why are you doing this? And he said, I'm doing it. It's going to work. And so that was in 2007. And then 2017, I ended up buying into the brand. But there was a lot of stuff that happened in between there. One, me continually calling Ray in my realtor role, trying to pitch in new sites to him. And I've got this and I've got that. And then finally, he's like, my God, this girl won't stop calling me. And I started really doing a good bit of site work, with them along the way. And then when the real estate market crashed in 2008, it really made me feel like I have got to diversify. I'd already been thinking about it, and I needed just multiple streams of income, kind of that Robert Kiyosaki mentality, and that really drove that home for me. So then, when the opportunity came in 2015 to start the Rapid Fire brand with Ray and a couple other partners, I jumped on that. Still kind of keeping my real estate side. And then in 2017, when I had opportunity to buy into Hotheads, which is a much bigger, more established brand, I definitely, jumped into that. And it just really, my journey from real estate into restaurant, well, one, thought I knew a decent bit about restaurants, at least, what they're looking for as far as HVAC and that kind of stuff. but I didn't know anything really until I really got involved. And then I just became a lot, I learned a lot more about what was needed. And I really learned over these years um, how important a good piece of real estate is. And, a lot of brands are looking for end caps or freestanding buildings. And as a realtor, I thought, oh, how much can that matter? Well, I really do know now as I look at our sales and as a general statement, they just tend to perform better. And I think it's really the visibility. And I've learned, again, how much more important access, visibility, in addition to demographics and traffic counts. And, there's such thing as too much traffic on a road, when it comes to a restaurant, how important drive-throughs are. So it's really been quite a journey and really interesting and exciting. I love it. I love the real estate piece of it. I love finding a good piece of real estate and having a great location for our franchisees.
Yeah. So okay, so I have so many questions as you were going through it. I'm like, my wheels are turning. I'm excited. I have a lot of conversations with a lot of hospitality leaders that are very like tech focused, and obviously we'll dive into the tech piece as well, obviously tech podcast, but yet to really talk to somebody with that like that real estate mindset, that development mindset. So I'm very excited to kind of dive into some of these questions that are turning through my head right now. But one thing that really stood out to me is, thinking, I work with a lot of folks in the emerging brand space, a lot of, private equity groups, a lot of investors, people that are looking to scale brands or their individual brands. What excited you about Hothead Burritos? Because there's so many, brands out there and there's so many different concepts, and I would love to kind of hear, like, it sounds like Ray like took a chance on that 1 year lease. Like, what about Hotheads was did you gravitate towards?
Yeah. The interesting thing, again, as I've learned more and more along the way, you know, Ray taking that risk seems like, oh, you're going to open up a restaurant. Okay, well, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. You've only got this one year lease. You don't have a huge obligation. Well, the reality is the equipment that he needed that was different from Subway. I mean, that's a significant investment in and of itself. So, that again, one thing that I've definitely learned along the way. But the other thing, as far as that I personally love about Hothead and then what it gravitated, besides hometown brand, I'm always one to root for the underdog. Like I don't, whether it was my kids' Peeway or sports or, Super Bowl, like, I'm not big into sports, but I'm rooting for the underdog as a general statement. So that's why, of course, I love our little, brand that was, formed in, Dayton, Ohio, in the Dayton, Ohio area. But I think the thing about Hothead that differentiates us really is the variety of ingredients and foods that we have available, much more so than any of our competitors in our direct space. And it allows a customer to go and we have 14 different sauces. So in reality, you can go 14 days in a row and never have the same flavor profile because you can choose what that is. Now, the person who's having straight ranch is not the person who's having the straight habanero as a general statement. It's like I wouldn't roll through those 14 flavors myself, but it just gives that variety. But then the other thing that I think is really exciting and I think is what gives Hothead its staying power is that you can really eat healthy at Hothead. And you can do it. And a lot of people being on the go, it makes it super challenging. We have a lot of people who are, you know, competing in bodybuilding kind of stuff. And, those guys get pretty hardcore at the end, but just on a daily basis. I mean, they can come in and have one of our power bowls, which is super protein heavy. And, if you're really trying to be super disciplined and cut your carbs, well, you get rid of the rice. Like me, a lot of times I'll get rid of the rice and add the beans because it's a better carb for you. So we kind of have, those options for people who are really trying to eat healthy, but then, you can smother it with queso if you want and, kind of everything in between. So um, it allows us to take care of customers in what they're looking for. If they're looking for something really healthy, or if they're just looking for something that tastes really good and some comfort food, then our smothered burrito will make you feel really comfortable, especially on this weather with it up and down and cold. It really does a good job.
I will say I am definitely the person that would go through the 14 different flavor profiles. I would be like, and I would be that person that goes, "Can I try the 14 all at once?" And so I think, but I will say, like, I mean, it sounds delicious. I'm starving already now thinking about like these conversations not only get my wheels turning, but it gets my stomach moving because I'm like, okay, I can't, I need to try this. And I think another thing that kind of really stood out to me when it came to, your background is, and this is something that happened to me. So, like, working in the tech space, I then transitioned into the hospitality space about 2 years ago. I've always been really into technology, organizations and companies that are driving impact across their, across their organizations, their profiles. And with that being said, coming into the hospitality space, transitioning from the healthcare space, I always thought, oh yeah, I know a lot about hospitality. I love food. I'm a big foodie. I'm, this and that. And like, so I know a lot. But the amount that I've learned while being in the hospitality space has been more than I ever could have imagined, anticipated. I'm still learning today, learning from these conversations. So, I think would love to kind of hear, like you mentioned in your background, is that, you went into it from real estate. You were like, oh, I know a lot about hospitality. Like, I'm excited. But then, as you dove in, you were like, wait, there's so much more to learn here outside of just, the real estate aspect. So I'd love to kind of hear, like, what were your biggest takeaways from that transition?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest takeaways, again, what I think is a good piece of real estate, what really is a good piece of real estate for a brand, there was some differences with that. But the other thing that I learned, I'm very much a numbers person. I had a financial securities license, in my background. I like to say I collect licenses, but I really just love to learn. And I really learned how important that rent number is for a franchisee. I think as a general statement, more people really need to look at your brand, look at what your AUV is for the brand, and then look at the rent number that a landlord wants you to pay. And does that make financial sense? As a general statement, we like our all in occupancy cost to be about 8% of sales. So if you're pitching a deal to me that's, where my rent's going to be potentially 10 or 15% of what my average unit volume is, I always want to think I'm going to be in the top 10, the store will be in the top 10, but there's an average because for a reason, stores have an average. And so I always try to target that and think about, okay, where does this put us at? Does this put us in a good place? And, the good thing about Hothead is that we work with our franchisees and we have a number of different floor plans. We're not a brand that does ground up construction all the time. Actually, rarely kind of recommend against it for our franchisees just because it tends to be expensive. It just is. It's expensive to buy a piece of land, build a building, even multi-tenant. And I'm just very conscientious of that. And then, very conscientious of like, do I have enough parking? What's my tenant mix and how is that going to work? And it's very, very important because not having enough parking at a location can hold your sales down just because your customers get frustrated when they can't park and they're going to drive on through to the next place and they might not risk coming to you again because they only have a short amount of time for lunch and they're going to move on and go somewhere else. And so we look at those kind of things. It's very important. Again, didn't really think about that as much as a realtor, but now that I understand it and how it can really financially impact the bottom line of a store, it's much more pertinent in my mind.
Yeah, and that's like so interesting because that's something I would have never thought of. So, like, see, like, I'm learning, that is something I would have never thought of from like the operations perspective. Is like,
Yeah.
well, okay, what is our parking like? One thing that also stood out to me, and I'm just interested, is so you mentioned the single building perform better than the, like, so standalones perform better than, so is that like I guess, like, in my head, is that how, like, a shopping mall, for example, would that not be considered like standalone?
No, no, a shopping mall would not. So it's like, a standalone building is what you typically think of as far as, your McDonald's and your Taco Bell. They're in a freestanding building all by itself.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And the reality now, access to that building, direct street access is very important. But um, when you have a freestanding building, you generally have more signage that's available to you. You have a better line of sight from the road where your building is more visible, assuming you're kind of, right up on the road. So those things really do make a difference. Now, when I'm looking at a freestanding building, because I have more signage, I also have a little bit more cost to open because I have to buy more signage to put on that. Signage is for all intents and purposes, call it a one-time expense. Maybe I'm having to refresh, 10 years down the line. But signage is the best marketing I can possibly get because the people driving by are hopefully your customers, so they see you all the time. So having more signage is better. And sometimes that can really be a challenge in different cities because they have all these zoning regulations, and cities hate signage and they love trees, and I love trees too, but I just don't love trees in front of my building that's blocking my signage and blocking access. Really an interesting battle sometime with the municipalities, just not understanding how important that is. One, I think, for the customers to be able to see you easily versus slamming on the brakes and trying to turn in because they just passed that clump of trees and now they see you. But who am I? I'm not a urban planner.
No, but that's actually so once you said it, I was like, wait, that makes so much sense. Cause even me thinking about like, as a customer and I'm driving down the road and I'm like hungry and I'm looking for something to eat, like, okay, the standalone that I see, like the McDonald's, the Chick-fil-A's, and I'm like right there. And you see the big golden arches and you see you're like, okay, it's right there. But then when you pass I guess more of like a shopping mall, you're like, oh, I see the Dunkin', the Starbucks, the this, the that. You're like, I feel like it's harder for me to register, okay, what is it that I want to eat right now?
Yeah.
Or like I'd register that it's there. So it's just so interesting because it's something I would have never thought of. But
Right.
once you say it, I'm like, it makes so much sense from
Yeah, and
that,
then
like,
and then the other thing is like when you're going in a shopping center and whether it's Walmart or a grocery anchored center, as you're driving up to it, you're seeing this great big sign for that main anchor and then the little bitty signs for all the tenants that are next to it, and it just makes it really hard to see. And then if you get some trees and bushes in front of it, and visibility is really important, and not having those freestanding buildings in front of me blocking the sight for my customers is really important. And again, as a realtor, I didn't get really how important that was and why brands were always looking for that, but I really do know that now. And again, kind of my challenge is there's only so many end caps and so many freestanding buildings, especially if I don't want to build a brand new one. So it does give a little challenge, but I've always said, be patient, find the right site, don't just grab something that's not a good location. We want to give you the best opportunity for success that we can. And, these things really do make a difference.
yeah. And I mean, even you saying, like, even you kind of explaining the thought process behind it, I'm like, that makes so much sense. Where I would have never in my wildest dreams thought of that. I would have been like, "Oh, great. Location looks great. They have a kitchen in the back and some seating." Like, I would have never considered the parking. I would have never considered is there too much traffic on the road? Not enough traffic, things like that. So I mean, these are all so helpful for especially like our listeners that might be looking to transition into the space. Like they might think that they have some aspects of, okay, I know I need to do this, but there's so much to the business that you kind of need to think through to ensure that you are able to scale your operations and really make a name for yourself. And it sounds like that is one piece that has like of your diverse background that has influenced, your impact at Hothead Burritos. But I'd love to kind of hear a little bit about like how your diverse background kind of influenced your leadership style. Especially, I know that you're so big in like, mentoring women in the space. And, I know you lead a really a diverse team. So I'd love to kind of hear how your background has really influenced the style and the approach that you take to leadership in specific.
I think one of the main things I feel like I bring to the team is the fact that I never even worked in a restaurant as a kid because I'm like, wait, that's way too hard to work. I don't want to do that. So it sounds a little contradictory, but while we were opening brand new stores, with our previous brand, and when we'd be doing opening stores in Hothead, and during COVID, I did spend a good amount of time working in the stores. And the way how I think that benefited the brand is I went in as either the 18-year-old kid that the franchisee is hiring, who you got to teach how to do it, or the franchisee who has zero restaurant experience themselves, and they've got to read an operations manual or a recipe page, and can they follow it? And my experience level and an 18-year-old kid our experience level is totally different. And if I can't understand it, they sure can't understand it. So we have to figure out ways, and we've, I think, really done a great job in trying to meet our employees and our franchisees on whatever level they want. Not only do we have written operations pages, but we have videos. We try to do everything we can. To help people learn that they learn best, and to make our operation super super simple. It's important for our franchisees to be able to train new employees and get them on the line and get them productive right away. And then, also it's very important for our customers to have that consistency in operations because they're expecting the same thing every time they go into a restaurant. They expect our fresh made guac to taste the same in Ohio as they do in Florida or in Connecticut. And so having those specific recipes and kind of my detail to the operation, I think is really the other piece that I bring is making sure that, we're doing things, we're communicating, and knowing not everybody that we're dealing with has 30 years of experience in the restaurant business. And I also, all my other partners have been male. I'm obviously not. I'm a woman with now grown kids, but I also think mom wise, like, okay, how does mom with two kids dragging them in, how does she want to shop? How is the bag? I mean, as simple as the bag, I got a purse, I got two kids, and you're giving me food, and how am I getting out the door? And things as simple as that. I think I lend a different perspective than my male partners on that because they're not it's not as traditional of a role. So I'm always thinking like, how do I make it easy for my customers? And the same thing for, our managers. Like in our corporate stores, we have 11 corporate stores. 7 of my 11 corporate stores are run by women because I think women have, one, as a general statement, greater attention to detail, and we're better multitaskers. I mean, it just is. And sometimes it's so funny that I've been told that when we start multitasking, sometimes men just think we're just like all over the board. No, we're just like, trying to accomplish as
We're
many things as
efficient.
we can in the least amount of time. And we're not all over board. We're just trying to, if I can handle 2 tasks at one time, great. So I think, you know, I recognize how that diversity, my background and helping, our managers and supervisors, and we have in our stores, 10 of my 15 assistants are also women. So, we really just recognize what a great contribution women are to our organization. And the same thing with our franchisees. Of my franchise, I have 34 franchise groups in the chain, and of that, 18 of those, if they don't have a primary woman running the brand, they are a significant partner in the brand. So more than half of my franchisee groups either led by or include women in the group. So I think that it's just a natural in the restaurant business that we can just that detail.
I agree with that. I think, women having a seat at that table brings a whole different perspective to efficiency, to the customer, to the working mom, to the stay-at-home mom, the on the go, individual looking to build their career, like how, like you mentioned, down to the bag, right? Or like down to, it's after soccer, you're grabbing something to eat, you're doing a million and one other things, you're multitasking and you're looking, how can I get a quick, healthy meal for my kids? And I think you kind of bring that fresh perspective to the table. It's so interesting too, because outside of, like you mentioned, like correlating like your experiences like with motherhood to like your leadership style is so impactful, I think, especially and I think they go hand in hand. So it's incredible. Hats off to you. But I think also like not having that restaurant experience as a child or as a teenager gives you a whole new fresh perspective. It doesn't, because times are changing. And it kind of transitions me to this, my next point. And I, wanted to kind of transition to that tech aspect, but times are changing. And even a year ago, whole new tech on the docket, to whole new processes on the docket. And so, you not having that, well, this is what we did back in, the early 2000s or whatever, you're kind of looking at everything from a clean slate and, where these gaps might lie just based off of, you're not, set in your ways. would love to kind of hear like that fresh perspective that you brought to the table, like from the technology perspective. Like if you noticed, where gaps might have lied and you're like, okay, wait, we need to solve for this. And like maybe we can look at some innovation to solve for this. So kind of like brings me to my next point. And like I said, this, we're a tech podcast at the end of the day for the hospitality space. So, one of my questions was going to be around what the future, how technology has supported in scaling, in future endeavors, in all of that. So kind of, would love to kind of hear your thoughts there.
So again, my background is not super techy. So, but I'm also okay. My background is not super techy. I have a lot of my employees, maybe especially younger ones, they definitely tend to be more techy. But my franchisees don't all tend to be techy either. So my tech has to be simple enough to use is super important for us. And then it also has, there's so much tech out there, but is it affordable? Do I have a good return on investment? And, is it really going to help better the process? So those are kind of some of the things that we're always looking at and evaluating. I will say that probably one of the best things we did, and gosh, it's probably been at least 5 years now, we switched over to Q as our POS system. And we have tried a lot of other ones. So I've been through it again, not the techie, not the restaurant person, but I see on a functionality basis, Q has done a great job with us, kind of back to that, the mom side of it, that online ordering. So if I'm picking my kids and I'm trying to take them to soccer, I can online order, run in and grab my food, and we're all eating at the field, before or during the kids are playing. And that's very important on that efficiency for women, I think. And then, having our loyalty program, we use Punch. It does a great job. It allows us to reach out, reward our customers for being our customers. And also we can give them free items and stuff for signing up. So I think that really engaging with your customer, your hardcore customers are really wanting those loyalty systems. And it's very, very important to do that and to have something, again, functional, easy to use, good ROI. And then kind of just thinking a little further, we were very fortunate that prior to COVID, we had already embraced third-party delivery. So when the shutdown happened, we were not scrambling trying to get our brand signed up with third-party vendors. Thank goodness, because that allowed us just to keep moving. Like a lot of brands, we actually internally, because we have a really great IT team, set up a text system so that when customers came to the store, they could text us and we could bring the order out. Now, on a functionality basis, it didn't work very well because one, we were all short employees, and then you really need that one employee to be that runner in and out. And as soon as we could, honestly, we really kind of shut that down because our execution really wasn't the way we wanted it. So that's like, is the tech easy to use? In theory, yes, but in a functionality way, it really was not. And then kind of the one thing that I know actively where we see tech is kind of on that AI, the AI front. And again, it goes back to the affordability, but ultimately we see where AI can help us be more efficient in our operations. Specifically, in our brand, most everything is custom made. So are my employees ringing in that guac or the queso or the double meat? And if they're not, that's negatively affecting my franchisees' food costs and and profitability. So, if I can, that's kind of our next solution is that a little bit of that automation on that, so we can make sure our customers that our customers are paying for what they're getting. Again, we want the consistency of brand, and my franchisees are profitable because that's where they're going to expand with us. And we've been working on some kiosk testing and stuff, and I think that's just super. I mean, that's on the forefront. That's coming. But as a consumer, I've seen frustration when I've gone, like into a McDonald's, and they're making everyone use the kiosk, and the older the customer is, the less likely they're going to be to embrace that. For the next few years, that transition it's going to be tough for, I think, the older generation, but this is the way things are going, and it's going to help restaurants in general control their food costs, reduce their labor by having that kiosk instead of having someone who's constantly taking orders and filling sodas and those kind of things.
I think one thing that I really valued about this conversation and it's really stuck out to me, there's been a few themes, but I think your ability, Kelly, to step into the shoes of the customer. And I think that is what I've gathered a lot of from this conversation is like the ability that, you really put yourself in the shoes of all different types of customers that might come into Hothead and how you can build an incredible experience for them. And I feel like that in itself has been like, I don't know. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but based on everything you've shared with me, I'm like, that in and of itself has been like, I feel like, I don't know your real estate background and being a people's person. And like, obviously real estate agents are like the most personal people in the world and but they have to be efficient. They need to be on top of things. And it sounds like, you've really put yourself into the shoes of your potential customer, which might have sprung from your background, maybe in, being a mother, but maybe also being a real estate agent. There's so many different things, but it sounds like that to me has been the biggest takeaway is you've really put yourself into the shoes of the customer. And I feel like that's something that a lot of listeners could take away with them when thinking through, how to scale operations, how to be more efficient, simplicity. So for the customer, but also for the employee.
Yeah. I mean, it's really important that, obviously a restaurant has to have good food and the good service, but part of that good service is efficient operations and, don't do things that slow me down and, having that ability to online order and then at a restaurant level delivering that because just because I online order, if the employees don't understand how to really throttle the customers, like who's in front of me, when did this order come in, and how do I make sure things are done? And we are constantly working with our staff and our franchisees on educating them. We do a weekly video for our franchisees and just usually like a 1 or 2 minute thing to just touch on those kind of topics. Like, hey, don't forget, that customer who put their order in, they are expecting at 11:30 to be able to walk in there, grab their food and go because maybe they have an eye doctor appointment, at that time. And, we really have to understand, it's that kind of customer service beyond the customer service. It's the efficiency. And honestly, a lot of our employees, we found that we reduce friction by online ordering and kiosk ordering. So that way the employees just have to make the food. They don't have to have any pressure from a customer saying, can you put a little more jalapenos on that burrito or bowl? It's super simple for them and they can actually serve the customer a lot faster with online ordering.
Yeah.
And then one of the other things we didn't really touch on too is like that drive-through ordering. I think we had drive-throughs prior to COVID. I feel we've really perfected that during that time. Of course, our throughput will never be as fast as a traditional, fast food restaurant that has, standard items on there. We are still custom making that. But, I always encourage my franchisees to at least, if they can get a store at least with a pickup window to do that, because that way my mom with the 2 kids going to soccer practice, she can just drive through. I don't have to get the kids out of their car seats and I can keep on going. And then we can also offer that pickup window for our third party delivery drivers. They're going to love us if they don't have to get out of the car too, because, I mean, who wants to get out of the car in the rain and the snow and all that, or the, extreme heat, extreme cold, if you don't have to. And so just by making our process easy and, hassle free is one of our main focuses on a daily basis.
Yeah, no, it goes back right to my point. You're thinking of all the different scenarios for the customer, for that third party delivery driver, for the employee. You're really putting yourself in the shoes of every individual that helps drive success for hotheads. But I always like to end all my episodes with the same question. And it's for our listeners, individuals that are listening in that might be looking to make a career transition into the hospitality space. Maybe, an individual who has a concept and they're looking to scale it and take it from 0 to 50 or even 0 to 1. Would love to hear the advice that you would have for somebody either, looking to make that transition, and jump into the hospitality space and begin to scale their operations.
I mean, you just cannot have enough education and research. I mean, I'm always a really big proponent of that. And, again, as I think about my transition from real estate to restaurant, a lot of times in the real estate world, landlords that I worked for wanted to see a business plan from the business. And a lot of them were very hesitant. They didn't have one. They didn't know what they were doing. They were hesitant to put that, to put one together. But it's so important to have a realistic expectation of what you really think you can do. And if you're starting a coffee shop and you think you're going to sell 500 cups a day, are you? What are the biggest competitors doing? What are the smallest competitors doing? And really trying to get a good handle on, one, you know, what your realistic sales can be. And you can do a lot of research. There are resources out there to kind of help back you into those numbers. And then, two, to really understand what your expenses are going to be. We talked about rent, making sure your rent is in line. It can be the most beautiful site in the whole world and can be perfect, but if your sales are not going to let you afford the rent, you're going to fail. So it is really important to look at that, to make sure that you have the right equipment and you have a good contractor who can quickly build your restaurant, because as you're negotiating a lease, you only have a limited amount of time to do your build out before your rent kicks in. And you don't want your rent kicking in before you're opening your restaurant, because that's just more cash out of your pocket, more carrying costs. And to really make sure that you're thinking those things through. And then advertising is so important. As a franchise, we have a standard, marketing fee in addition to our royalties that we charge our franchisees. And sometimes I get questioned or pushed back a little bit as I'm talking to potential franchisees. And the reality is you need to be doing this. You need to be doing this advertising, and we're just going to make you do it. Because again, back to real estate world, I've seen a number of different concept restaurant or retailers who open. They do a big advertising push when they start, then you never hear from them again, and they expect you to remember they're still there because they're living it every day. They're grinding it out. They're trying to make things happen. I don't remember that you opened. Oh, I forgot that, on the other side of town, there's this little, whatever wine bar that I wanted to try. Well, if you don't keep telling me about it, I'm not going to remember. And, so making sure you have all those things in your budget is very important. And that is the advantage of a franchise. A good franchise is, we have the playbook, follow the playbook, and we're going to help you through that. We know what the most economical ways to advertise are and what are not. And, you can spend a lot of money, but not make not make a big dent, in the demographic you're trying to reach. So, making sure you have the, right professionals on your team, making sure you really think through that business plan and how much everything is going to cost, utilities, advertising, everything, taxes, accounting service, your payroll service. There's a lot.
No, and again, I think it goes back into putting yourself into the shoes and of the individuals like that are, the customer, are doing the day-to-day operations, are, looking to I think you've done an incredible job at that. And, Kelly, this has been a really incredible conversation. It's been really inspiring to hear your approach to leadership, how you've made the transition from real estate into the hospitality world, how you've taken what you've learned, really ensured you could support in scaling successful business. I really enjoyed hearing about how, you're mentoring this next generation of hospitality leaders. It's been a really, really incredible conversation. And for those of you who want to keep up with Hothead Burritos or connect with Kelly, we'll have the links in the show notes. But thank you so much, Kelly, for joining us today. It's been really incredible.
Thank you so much. And yeah, I just do your research and really think through your differentiating factors and just, do the right thing every day for your customers and your employees and your franchisees. That's what we try to do.
No, and I can even, yeah, I'm so excited for Hothead's journey. I'm now going to be looking out next time I'm actually headed down to Florida, and in a few weeks I'm going to be looking out for a Hothead Burritos. I
Yeah.
know you mentioned you have a few
Yeah.
locations
Yep.
down
Up in the
there.
Panhandle. So come see us in the Panhandle of Florida.
Yes, I'm gonna be looking out.
Okay.
And to our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your network. We'll be back soon with more conversations from the leaders shaping the future of the restaurant industry. Until next time, this is Miranda with Fast Casual.